comic books have a gatekeeping problem. That is a pretty definitive, strong statement. But I don't think that that fact is the end of the world.
Hmm.
Now, here's what I mean. There are a lot of ways in which I think comic books have sort of gatekeeping issues. One of the ways that I think comic books have a gatekeeping issue is the fact that there is a whole segment of the audience who seems very intent, and I include myself in this to some degree, who are very intent on things staying the way that they are, staying the way that they've always been, staying the same. And sometimes just that idea alone can be alienating to people who want to get in and express their own ideas and see how things could be different. And in that specific way, I don't think that the gatekeeping is necessarily bad. Like, for example, I am anti progress when it comes to stuff like characters aging and dying. I'm
Hmm.
anti progress. I would never want to see that. And there are a lot of people, especially younger comic book readers, who, whenever we ask, like, what are the problems with comics, one of the first things they say is, characters don't age, they don't grow, they stay the same. There's not enough change. And to me, that's not a problem at all.
I mean, I'm trying to tackle this from two different ways here, because I do think comics not changing is a big topic. There's a lot of ways
Mhm.
that could be talked about. I think specifically we're talking characters and growth, and that being kind of a gate that people are keeping. I'm kind of with the youths on this one. I think that I think leaning on that as something that like a hill you're gonna die on, is not the best. Like we were just talking about it, I think, with the chat when Absolute Batman came out. Um, and people saying, like, oh, you know, why does Alfred need to be? People complaining Alfred's not alive in the main continuity, but he is here, and people are saying, oh, I like that he's dead in the main continuity. It's it's forward momentum and all that. Um, and I kind of agree with that. And I don't necessarily think that needs to be something that stops people from reading. But I can see how it's a barrier for some people, where it's like, all right, I'm going to invest time in this, but nothing's going to change.
I think also that illusion of progress isn't always an illusion as much as it can be. uh I might be losing my metaphor here. It can be a brick wall in that it's very obvious of what's happening and why it's happening, and you know uh that's what's keeping this thing is what has to happen to get new readers, get back to a status quo. We specifically, I'm thinking of the rubber banding of Krakoa and the X-Men. um they did it a lot smoother than I think we anticipated. Brought things back to a status quo that feels like a lot more classic X-Men, but we lost a lot of change that at least at first, we were all quite a few of us were really, really excited about. Um, and I think that superhero comics and we talk a lot about these being soap operas. Case in point, soap operas can be very uh obvious about what they're doing and the reasons they need to do it. And I can see that being an issue with new readers, especially when you get to something, like your Final Crisis, your New 52, especially when you've been through a couple and you're seeing a timeline stretched out. It's like, oh, okay, this is a reset that's come a bit too frequently now. I think I got it.
Yeah, and again, like I said, this is something that I'm a proponent of. I think comics are what they are. I think specifically, superhero comics in the context of this video, at least when I say comics, that's what I'm talking about. I I am fine with it. I'm not saying I don't want new characters, although I actually kind of don't want new characters, just because we've gotten so many that end up getting put back in the toy box and then we don't see them again, and I get frustrated by that. It's like hard to invest in somebody new because you sort of know that once this run is over, that character is going to be in the abyss. And that's very frustrating to me. I don't get invested in new characters anymore. Like real quick, an example is Sync from
Mm.
Yeah.
the Krakoan era. He became one of my favorites, and now he's essentially doing nothing.
It happened twice with him when he was in Gen X. It was like, oh, look at Gen X. These awesome characters that people love, like Chamber. Then they're off the board.
Right.
Call it the sideways effect.
Still seeing those milk cartons.
Yeah.
But there is another definition of gatekeeping. Probably the definition that people more commonly think about when they see that name, and certainly when they see this title. And that is about the gatekeeping of people based on, you know, ideas that might be considered, alienating, I guess. Like we saw what happened with, like Heather Antos and the milkshake controversy and some of that stuff, and the people who are anti, um, you know, socio-political stuff and want to gatekeep people in that regard.
Keep your politics outside of my comics. Yeah.
Right, right, right. And I think it's tough, man. It's tough because that is a problem. That is definitely a problem. There's no doubt in my mind that that's a problem. But when you look at the demographic of comic book readers, big two readers, so many of them fit the not that they fit that mentality certainly, but that they fit within the lexicon of what's acceptable, that it's like everybody that like almost everybody that's in the fold is already like this. So they're sort of saying, "Hey, this is for us, not for you." And that's a conversation that I see a lot with like Star Wars, where it's like, we all already love it this way. You don't have to come into it and change it.
And I think that's a short-sighted thinking, in my opinion. Um, like taking away the people that are just plain old rude and dicks about it. Like outside of that, like we already know, like bad, don't do that. Don't be
Right.
that guy. We run on a "Don't be a dick" motto here at the Comic Spouse. Um, but I think just from like a fan of the medium, that's short-sighted. Like the thinking is, all right, this is something. Comics is something that I love so much, and I have a personal interest and investment in it. Right? Some probably monetary investment as well, and it's a thing that I am it's comfortable with me, and I understand it. And if that changes, then almost a part of me changes, and I can't let that happen. I can see that mindset, but the inverse is, well, if you love something like that so much, you should let it grow. You should let more people have it, um, because that means more money. Like if I'm looking at it just from a clinical standpoint, there's more money in it. Then more comics are made. Then more of the stuff you do like also gets made. And I think people don't see that kind of aspect of it. It's that whole idea of trying to reach new readers, that albatross that we can't find. um, Part of it is that sometimes comic shops can feel a little gatekeepy. You know, sometimes the fan base can feel like that, whether intentional or not. I'm sure your friend at the comic shop you go to, Sean, who's always there, comic explaining things to innocent
People.
bystanders.
Yeah.
That probably gives a little bit of that gatekeepy feel, even though he might be trying to invite people in. It could feel like, all right, whoa, all right, maybe this isn't for me. So I think there needs to be a cognizant, um, I guess, thought process behind it. to not be that guy and to kind of be inviting and kind of be almost have some excitement for new things. I mean, that's just my thoughts on it.
Let me play devil's advocate, a role
My
I
favorite.
rarely like to step into. I don't really enjoy this, but I do think it's worth it for the sake of this conversation. So I am of the mind that, it's fine to introduce new ideas. That's great. And that's certainly something I genuinely feel. But what about a person who says, "Hey, I've been a part of this for 30, 40 years. I love it the way it's been. You're making all these changes and doing all these things and introducing all these characters and doing everything to appeal to a group of people who, by sales, aren't buying comics. So you're changing the industry and we're losing people who are saying they're leaving because of this, but we're not necessarily gaining people through these tactics that are clearly tactics that make it feel for me like I'm being pushed out in favor of a fabled person."
I think there's a big question mark that is in this because I agree if we're talking about direct market that we have numbers for. We do not have numbers for digital. And a lot of these new markets will probably be buying digital. So we don't even know if that affects things or if that can be beneficial to the long term for certain books. Could it maybe kill physical comics? Possibly.
Mainline Sean talking last year, pretty sure ICV2 released their sales figures and digital was in the realm of 10%
Hmm.
in terms of being a contributor to the overall market.
Thank you for clarifying. That was Sean speaking.
Yes,
Not devil, Sean.
exactly. But seriously, like, do either one of you have a like a reasonable response to that?
I don't know if it's a reasonable response, but my response is then if no change ever happens, it's just gonna die. If it doesn't evolve, it'll die because those people that hold it dear will die. Like as dark as that is, the people that have that opinion aren't gonna be there forever. So you have to at least make the movements to try and do these things. That's the Didio method, right? Like having to like maybe lose some people in the immediate and gain people in the long term. And
That
that's
that was about money.
sure.
It wasn't about gaining people in the long term. It was about charging more to the people who are still reading
Yeah.
and allowing the people who won't pay that price to go away because you'll make more off the people who stay.
I was talking about like the missing generation he talked about that we missed
Yeah,
out on.
he has
Yeah.
no answers for that.
Yeah. But yeah, like I just feel like if you do nothing, then you're just putting a timer on comics at that point.
I struggle with this question. I genuinely do. I don't have an answer. Because if it's true that these tactics that they're using to supposedly bring people in, and I say supposedly in quotes, uh if they're using tactics and they're clearly tactics and they're not working, like they've been doing it for a long time, surely if it wasn't working, they would have stopped by now.
What do you mean by tactics? Like newer, diverse writers, digital Infinity comics, like just new initiatives? Is that what you mean?
I mean, I'm addressing what the question asker, whatever tactics they're bringing up, right? Sidekicks as heroes, changing genders, changing uh, races, and so in the case of those, they did swap back. Thor is back. Captain America is back.
I personally don't think they're tactics. I think, you know, when you look at like the examples that Cale just gave, that era that we all know about, the Mighty Four, Sam Wilson,
Yeah.
Laura Kinney as X-23. I don't think that that was an initiative on the part of Marvel personally, but I know that even I was kind of like, I don't know, man. I'm not feeling this genuinely.
And it was a lot at once.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wonder if that was a big part of that issue because, you know, we've had other Thors. Thor was a frog once, right? There have been other Captain Americas. Captain America wasn't even Captain America for a while,
He was a wolf
right?
once.
He was a wolf once. Um, and people love Kate Bishop. Um, but I think I wonder if that particular era gets pinpointed because it was it felt like an initiative. You know, suddenly Iron Man was evil and uh Thor was a woman and Captain America was black and whoa, where's all this coming from?
Right. And I think that there are people who were lost in translation of that, who say, even like, just take out the idea of a person being racist. Just put that to the side. Put the isms to the side and all that stuff. What about a person who just says like, "Yo, I love those characters. You've taken them off the board. They're why I read. Now they're not here. Why am I here?"
And I think when you bring up those examples specifically, it outside of the isms, like Sean said, it just seems like cheap pops for cheap pop's sake. It seems like doing a whole bunch of things at once to pop a dollar. I think that's what would turn me off on it.
Hmm.
It's like a whole bunch of new New York Post articles they can tout, or you know, they could have a little 30-second bit on Good Morning America,
Yeah,
and that
get
seems counter to the story. Like but like you can then say like Jane Foster Thor, that there's a clear delineation there for years and years of storytelling. But the timing of it was a lot at once. Yeah.
They were all good stories, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
and yeah, Captain America was the exact same. Um, but yeah, again, I think that sticks out for a lot of people, and a lot of people still. Somebody literally, I kid you not, as we're recording this today, this afternoon, this morning for me, someone brought this up to me as uh uh a reason that they like the comics more than the movies because they're changing the genders and they're doing um I think because it's so recent and all of it happened at once, and like, you know, the movies are sort of coming out of this era of um the material that is older, you know, with these characters is it's not always quite up to like movie standard, right? You can't make a ton of stuff out of, you know, the Fantastic Four beat up Galactus and then Johnny Storm's got to go to college. Um, so what I mean by that is the movies are all based in stuff that's fairly recent. Well, that stuff is fairly recent, and the actors are getting older, so they're having to kind of change stuff over. So you know, I think we're seeing a lot of those same complaints because again, it's all happening at once.
In the case of the MCU, like, there was a clear issue with diversity and
Mm.
stuff. And once Feige had the full reins, you know, and Ike Perlmutter wasn't as big a factor, they were immediately allowed to do what they needed to do to get it looking right, you know. And it is a lot at once. I don't know that I feel like the comics suffer that same problem. I think for me, what bothers me about that situation, and why, like, if somebody were to say that that's gatekeeping, like, I don't know what to say to it, because it's like, I love Jessica Jones, I love Captain Marvel, I love Rogue, I love She-Hulk. Throw them out there, make them popular, do big things with them, but don't fuck with my Thor. Like, let me have Thor. Why does Thor have to go? You know, why like why does Cap have to go? Like, that's kind of what happens in my mind, where it's like, you're taking something from me to make a swap that it almost doesn't even feel like you need to have. Marvel specifically has a ton of great characters that can can be put to the forefront. They did it with Captain Marvel when she was Miss Marvel.
When you have those thoughts, Sean, do you think, well, that feels kind of gatekeepy?
I mean, it doesn't really matter, because I don't share those thoughts. Like,
Sure.
my
Yeah, there's a difference.
what
Yeah.
like I'm speaking honestly with you guys right now, but like, I'm always gonna I'm always gonna promote what I think is the right thing. And those thoughts are thoughts that stay for me, and I work through them. I read every single one of those stories
Hmm.
despite my thoughts, and I loved every single one of them. And I'll champion them, even though while it was happening, I was like, this is a lot, man.
Well, I think
But
that's a
I also
clear difference, though.
that sorry, I do also think that there is a criticism in there versus, you know, oh, why can't I have Thor, Captain Marvel's
Hmm.
what there's a good faith criticism in there that said that, is saying, well, hold on, there's no one else we can do this with.
Well, that's why gatekeeping is a verb. There has to be an action involved that is
Hmm.
purposely pushing people out, so that doesn't change. So those feelings that you feel and you work through, and you eventually either get over, or you realize, like, yes, I felt that in the moment, but long term, I actually enjoyed the story. You're at least working through that. You're not actively doing the verb of gatekeeping, which then is purposely pushing people out, so that doesn't happen. That's the bad part that I think people have too much of a knee jerk reaction to do, rather than sitting down, thinking things through. And honestly, this can extend outside of comics, really.
Sure.
And realizing, hey, I've read comics for so long, I am that fan. I know this is going to change in a year or two.
Hmm.
It becomes reactionary.
Can I pivot? Do the companies gatekeep? We're
Oh, what sense?
paying we're paying a Hickman tax, right? Hickman books are $9.99 now. Absolute Batman is $5.99. Uh these books are expensive, and they're hard to get. If you don't know what you're doing, and they're hard to get into if you don't know what you're doing,
I don't
or
know if
you don't have someone, who can help you along.
I don't know if gatekeeping is the word. Gatekeeping seems much more like a fan based word. You know, you get into the companies doing it, and then there's business words for that. That's that's a price issue. That's greedflation. I don't know if
Well,
that's
a rosebud by
gatekeeping.
any other name, right? Like, you don't have money, you can't come in. That's gatekeeping.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that the what I would say to that is, I think that Marvel and DC, and probably the rest of the comics industry, knows who they're trying to get to buy their books. And that person is one of us, not someone from outside. You're going to have, if Marvel and DC had to really, like, sell comics hand to hand, you know, or have proxies do it at stores that just sell all kinds of things and also comics, people would look at the price and bulk. If comics were single sold at Target, they would have a very difficult time being single sold, because they're very expensive. So in a sense, they know, by targeting the direct market, which is like a whole bigger conversation, we're going to buy them. But they can't do the same thing elsewhere. So they're essentially locking the gates to anybody who is going to look at that price and say, that's not for me. that person is not the target for comics. The target, it's like that's the same thing as like, what's an expensive car? Like a Maserati. We are gate kept out of that. By that logic, like they don't want me to walk in the Maserati store.
I'm gate kept from buying a house or a gate. I can't buy an actual gate. I can't afford an actual gate.
So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's an interesting conversation to me because we get a lot of comments from people that I think through interaction are decent, well-meaning people who have problems with the industry that as long as they approach it from a certain point of view, I see what they're saying. And in some ways I feel the same ways. But I love comics so damn much, and the majority of my experience is so positive that I just sort of look past it, and I'm not as bothered by it, clearly.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of where I land. And I just was it this episode or the one we just recorded? Don't be a dick. That's my only like real response to solidify gatekeeping. You can have opinions on stuff, but if you're going about it in a way that is driving people away from comics in any sense, then you're not going about it the right way.
And that right there is the difference between, because you said gatekeeping is a verb. That's the difference between doing what we do. Like, we could have this conversation, move on with our lives. That's not the basis of the channel. Like, we just had it's just a thought experiment. There are other channels who take what we just discussed and make it their whole personality. And that is what I wouldn't want to do.
And they do that on both sides of the gate, to be honest.
Huh. I like it. I'd like to leave it there, if that's cool with you.
Leave it out on both sides argument. Jeez, okay.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
We can.
There are
That's
fine
fine,
people on both sides.
No. I was thinking about it.
That I don't subscribe to. I don't know. I like the idea of just leaving it up to you guys at home to make up your own minds and have a conversation in the chat.
And you guys have been commenting on these videos like crazy, so keep at it. I'm sure you'll have some discussion on this one.
Absolutely. Make sure while you're commenting, you leave a like and you make sure you're subscribed. We appreciate everybody who does all those things. We will see you in the next one. Until then, take care, guys.